Thank you all so much for joining us today. Welcome, everyone. We're excited to begin Uniting the West, Public Lands Dialogue. My name is Max Metz Jr., and I'm the Conservation Program Director with Hispanics Enjoying Camping, Hunting, and the Outdoors, or HO. I'll be moderating this conversation. At HO, we believe that conservation is strongest when it's bipartisan and rooted in shared values. That's why today's conversation is so important. Public lands in the American West are central to our culture, our economy, and our identity, but they're also facing real pressures from development and drought to deferred maintenance and climate challenges. In response, a new generation of leaders is stepping forward. Congressman Gabe Vasquez, representing New Mexico's 2nd District, Ryan Zinke, representing Montana's 2nd District, and Juan Ciscomani, representing Arizona's 6th District, along with others, have formed the new bipartisan Public Lands Caucus, a caucus dedicated to ensuring America's public lands remain open, accessible, and protected for all. Now, we've already seen what's possible when we stand together. Just recently, the American people spoke up to defeat an attempt to split public land sell-offs into the budget reconciliation process. That victory showed the power of bipartisan energy, grassroots advocacy, and broad public support for keeping our public lands in public hands. The session today is an opportunity to hear directly from these three members of the caucus about why it was created, what they hope it will achieve, and how bipartisan leadership on public lands can help shape stronger, more resilient communities across the West. Now, this is going to be a conversation focused on the future of the caucus. By the end of today's program, attendees should have a clear sense of the caucus's goals, how their own advocacy and local conservation efforts are connected to this broader federal strategy. Now, before we begin with questions, I'd like to remind attendees that the Q&A panel is open and that the congressman's teams will be able to monitor and address questions as they are able. The questions that I'll be asking today were shaped by submissions that you shared during registration. With that, I'm excited to formally welcome Representatives Vasquez, Zinke, and Ciscomani to the conversation. Now, let's jump into some questions and hear from the congressman. I'd like to start with you, Congressman Vasquez. For those that know you, it's obvious that you're an avid outdoorsman, that you have had a commitment to public lands since your childhood. Now, as a co-founder of the Public Lands Caucus with Congressman Zinke, tell us about the inspiration or the moment that led you to launch this caucus.
Well, thanks so much, Max. Thank you to HO. Thank you to National Wildlife Federation, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Thanks to Arizona Wildlife Federation, New Mexico Wildlife Federation, the folks who have helped put this on today. I really appreciate it. And certainly the great state of Montana, the great state of Arizona, and my friends Ryan Zinke and Juan Ciscomani. Look, I think we have faced critical moments in our country before, and we've had these discussions over time for many decades about how we value our natural resources in this country. And one of the advantages that we've always had is that public lands and conservation has been a bipartisan issue. One of the jobs that you have to do when you get to Washington, D.C., and you're tasked with being a representative of your district is understanding fully what the history is and understanding what the future looks like as well, so that you can legislate in the best interests of the people. And public lands have provided for me and my family in a lot of different ways, including sustenance hunting and sustenance fishing right here in New Mexico. So, I'm proud to have 4 national forests in my district, 2 national parks, thousands and thousands of acres of public land, the nation's first wilderness in the Gila National Forest, and the legacy of folks like Aldo Leopold, Gifford Pinchot, Teddy Roosevelt, who all took an interest in my district and in my state when we were first coming up with this great idea that all Americans deserve to have access to these public places where we could find both healing, respite, but also be able to hunt and to fish and to camp and now to do all kinds of stuff. There's paragliding in my district that happens on public land, just as an example. Very special interest group, but you know what? They deserve to be able to do that. Mountain climbers, there's mountain bikers. There's all kinds of folks that benefit from the ability to have public lands in our district. It's one of the things that makes America unique, and it's one of the things that unites us as politicians in Washington, D.C. And so Representative Zinke and I we started supporting a couple of each other's bills, a wildlife corridor bill and the Public Lands and Public Hands Act as well. And it just came natural to me because what we were seeing was, some false narratives that were out there about some reasoning to sell off the people's lands, to sell off American federal and public lands, and it really did take a bipartisan effort to be able to uh, stop this from happening, both in the House and in the Senate, starting with Nevada and Utah, and then from Utah senator's proposal in the Senate. And I was so proud to stand with my colleagues, to stand with both Juan and stand with Ryan, and a bipartisan caucus that is now 20 members strong, 10 Republicans, 10 Democrats, that have said, look, our red line is any attempted sale of federal lands. And we have systems in place to be able to do that today when it benefits local communities with local input. Moving the conversation forward, this caucus is all about coming together to look at management issues, to look about the future of things like wildfire in the West, which we've been dealing with for as long as this country's been a country, and to look at the impacts that both human activity has on public lands and the future of things like wildlife corridors, watersheds, wildfire management, forest thinning. All those things are things that I expect us to be able to talk about. And so I'm really, really proud that we've been able to do this. Representative Zinke is the former Interior Secretary, somebody who knows this issue extremely well. I'd say the most, one of the most well-versed Republicans in Congress that has an idea of what actually the Department of Interior's job is, as well as USDA on the Forest Service side. It's great to be able to partner with him. And Juan he's my neighbor. He's my vecino to the west. We share some shared landscapes, including the Gila National Forest and Apache Sitegraves National Forest, but also places like the Coronado National Forest down south, which is where I do a lot of quail hunting, a lot of Coues deer hunting, and get to spend a lot of time with my family and with my friends. And so it's a natural partnership. I'm proud to be here today. Thank you so much again to Echo for hosting us, and I'll pass it back to you, Max.
Thank you so much. And we'll definitely dig into a lot of those topics that you've mentioned, and love the ideas of bipartisanship and being neighbors. We have a lot of these shared lands that we need to be thinking about. And this group is doing such great work on that. Now, Congressman Zinke, as Congressman Vasquez noted, you're the former Secretary of the Interior. Now you're in your third term representing Montana, and someone who's really in tune with the Western way of life when it comes to access to public lands. Now, you've played a key role, of course, in stopping recent attempts to sell off public lands. How has the way of life in the West influenced those efforts and your role in the formation of this new caucus?
I grew up in Montana, and the Montana I grew up in many ways, has changed. Public access was not a problem in the Montana I grew up with. There was a lot less fences, less Kelly humps, the access to forests. The forests were a lot of times working for us. And now, you look at the challenges we face, they're different. And I think we should all recognize, the reason why many of us live in the West and love the West is we were given a legacy by the great ones, by Roosevelt, by Pinchot. And the legacy we were given is now the challenge is how to manage it for the next 100 years. Because the West that I grew up in, even I grew up in the 60s and 70s, as a Boy Scout and very active around Glacier Park. The West has changed. And I think now is an opportunity, bipartisan, to look at the challenges ahead. Let's talk about wildlife corridors. Because as we go through, some wildlife, if you build a fence, for instance, sheep, they'll go around. Whether it's 60 or 70 miles in some cases, they'll go around because they don't go through fences. And a lot of the health of our herds depend on moving from ranges, whether it's winter range to a summer range. And in many ways, it's like veins in a body is if you start chopping off where you don't allow the access of movement of whether it's elk or in some cases any ungulates, you're jeopardizing what the future is of this country. So I'm very excited about looking at systems, whether it's watersheds, how to better manage them. in a bipartisan way, because, I think our duty is now, given what we've inherited, to make sure it's well managed for the next 100 years, and make sure the public has access to what I think is our greatest assets. America's best idea, our parks should be well managed. The bathrooms should be clean, and our wonderful outdoor experience. We should look at ways to make sure that the next generation experiences much the same experience that we did. So I'm excited that Gabe and Juan are champions of it. It's a national. It's not just, when we think about public land, people think about, well, it must be all west. Well, public land is also how we use it in the Smokies, which is, one of the heavier used, assets as far as public land goes. Or, each of us have different challenges, but, to talk together and look, this is not a Republican or Democrat issue. Throughout history, if you look at Teddy Roosevelt, he was a great Republican. Believe it or not, Dick Nixon signed Clean Air, Clean Water, Endangered Species Act. Different Congress, but Dick Nixon's signature on it. And now going fast forward, when I was the secretary, I'm a staunchly supporter of Teddy Roosevelt, multiple use. But at the same time, when I was secretary, we expanded the federal estate with wilderness areas. Savanosa was one of them. So, but I'm excited about the caucus. I'm excited about getting things done in the interest of what I think is an American issue.
Well, thank you so much. And I think we're definitely going to dig into what we all can do and ways that we all can engage. I want to turn it over to Congressman Ciscomani. You bring experience from your time with the Tucson Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and a focus on strengthening local economies. How do those perspectives shape your decision to join the new Public Lands Caucus? And how do you see the caucus supporting both public lands and economic growth?
Yeah, Maxwell, I just want to echo what both Gabe and Brian have said. It's an honor to serve with them on this. They've been great, strong voices on this issue to band together really and fight for what we believe in. And this is one of the examples that I think you can still find in Congress, and maybe I would dare to say the few examples now of true bipartisan work that we can put other differences aside and really work on this and actually have success at it, right? It's not just about, well, are we willing to be bipartisan and talk to the other side and then leave it at conversation? I think on this issue, we've been able to see what happens when we're able to do that, take that step towards each other to find common ground around protecting our public lands and actually have some success. You pointed at one big one, which was leaving the sales of public lands out of the reconciliation bill. And in this case, Congressman Zinke was very, very direct with the team and on both sides, and I think having the backing of the caucus also helped with this. So it's been great working with them, and also the different perspectives that we bring. Yes, different sides of the aisle, but as you mentioned, I come from working very closely with the private sector on this, and sometimes there's a misconception that private sector doesn't care about public lands, or if you're for business, you're against public lands. But there's a great link and connection between both. When you look at Arizona, for example, over $14 billion of the economy an impact comes from our amazing public lands. Of course, we're the Grand Canyon state, but we have 4 overall national parks, and I've been on efforts to create one in my district, the Chiricahua, which is right now a national monument, but could be a national park. When we look at the impact, the economic impact that this can have, it's amazing for the area. This is very close to Gabe's district as well, so it's that whole regional aspect of Gabe and I are working on another caucus, also the Southwestern Caucus, where all these issues on public lands and water and border, all these things really they don't know state boundaries in a lot of ways. But we so when we work together on this is essential, especially in the economic aspect of it, right? I mean, 111,000 jobs just about depend on the tourism that we see from our national public lands. And the moment that we protect that, we protect the beauty of our state. We protect what should be there for generations to enjoy, and also find a way to promote economic development, strength of the state, and be able to maximize it that way. We can do both at the same time, protect our amazing environment and our amazing natural resources, while also allowing businesses to prosper, create jobs, and have people put the opportunity to put food on the table. So we have a unique situation here where you have three members right now, and as Gabe mentioned, there are many more that are willing to put their name on the line on this and go on and fight for what we believe from different perspectives and for different reasons. If you get all 20 members on this conference call, you would get a different answer of why we're supporting this, which is the beauty of it, right? It's not like we're all under the same exact circumstance. It's just that we find interest on this. And I got to tell you, when that was up for debate on the public land sales and the reconciliation bill, I don't think I heard about any other issue as much as I did on this one from people that I know personally. It was something that people came out of everywhere to give us their opinion, their thoughts, and I'm very happy they did because I was with them the entire time. And again, I want to give thanks to both Ryan and Gabe for fighting hard for that.
And I think we're going to actually dig into that now. I think that's what a lot of folks are joining to hear about. Of course, the land sale and that attempt. I mentioned that in my intro, and you've all mentioned that in some ways, just how that was almost slipped into that reconciliation process. But the American public pushed back hard. I want to pose this to everybody, but we'll start with Congressman Zinke. Do you think we'll see attempts like that again, or has that idea kind of been put to rest? Are we done with this?
I don't think the threat is gone. And up front, I never in my lifetime would I have even given a thought to the idea that you're going to sell land, public land, at scale. I just thought that that idea would be so outlandish. But what we saw was a real threat. And let me just take a minute to talk about it. When I was secretary, I subtracted, I added, and I exchanged within the federal estate. I added Cereminosa, the wilderness in New Mexico. Why? Because you had two senators, Udall, you had Heinrich, you had the governor, you had the local community, all supported adding that territory in the wilderness. You know what? And the local voice mattered. Around Las Vegas, some of those lands were subtracted. And then we exchanged land that improved public access sometimes. But there's a process to it. There's a process to it. And in the West, you also have to recognize that most of the West was occupied by our Native Americans. And there's a lot of trust and treaty obligations. When they're public land, that means the tribes have access for ceremonial, for historical. But if you take land out of the public domain and sell it, then in many cases you potentially violate treaties. And look, a treaty is a treaty. I think the U.S. should honor the treaties. And then you have water rights in the West. Whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. And the interest of water in Arizona and New Mexico is a big deal. So when you transfer, you're going to sell the water rights or transfer and then subsurface. There's all sorts of process. And the reason why I'm saying this is that to do a fire sale, I think was and I was glad at the end of the day, all of us bound together to put it into it. But no, I don't think the threat is gone. I think we have to make it clear. Look, there are probably places. I'll give you one in Montana that's no one's ever heard of, Lima, Montana. There's 30 acres out there the U.S. Forest Service owns. They're going to put a headquarters there at one time. They're not going to put a headquarters there. It's not used for recreation, grazing. You know what? Great, give it to the schools. I did the same thing in New Mexico. The school needed a little more space, or there's a runway they needed. Great. But this idea that they're going to sell public land, somehow pay the debt off, and once it's gone without process. I think all of us should recognize that that's just not going to happen under our watch.
Well, thank you so much. Definitely hearing, listen to the locals, follow the process, follow the law, and be pragmatic about how we can leverage the great resource that is our public lands and the vastness there. Now, Congressman Vasquez or Ciscomani, anything to add?
Go ahead.
I'll jump in here real quick, Gabe, and then I'll turn it over to you because both Ryan and Gabe are been working on these issues for a while here, and I kind of mentioned a little bit of this on me hearing from people that I honestly, frankly, didn't expect to hear from on this issue, and so passionate and so fired up about it that I think was great to be able to have that backing. I mean, I know what I believe, and I knew what I was going to fight for, but knowing that my district was fully behind this, when you have Mount Lemon, Sabino Canyon in my district, and of course the Chiricahuas, these are all landmarks that we want to make sure that we protect. And I agree with Ryan. I don't think anything is safe. I think anytime we open up the door to reconciliation, we're gonna advance our priorities, and I think it's gonna be a lot of good stuff on the table, but also some things that we'll try to get squeezed in there again. I think that's just the nature of reconciliation. But you have on this call three people that are very committed to keep on with the same kind of message. And then also with proper legislation around that. That's why I'm proud to be a co-sponsor with both Gabe and Brian on their bill here on the Public Lands and Public Hands Act. I think things like this are preemptive and also, just sets it up where it needs to be. And it prevents that. We can't, every time that it's open for reconciliation, hold our breath and hope that we don't have to fight this fight every single time. We'll fight it as many times as we need to, but if we can have the right legislation in place that puts us in the right position to defend it automatically, I think we're going to be in better hands there. And it's also awareness. The last thing I'll say, Gabe, and I'll turn it over to you, but the last thing I'll say is on the awareness piece. Gabe and I are doing on the 27th, want to proclaim National Public Lands Day, and this is again efforts that make a difference, that impact, that people get behind, that form coalitions, and that people come out of everywhere to say, yeah, I support that, and remind people that you have Republicans, Democrats, people that love the outdoors, people that have been in business organizations all across that are saying this is important to us. It's important to our constituents. And frankly, to the whole country, but especially to the Western states. I think that's key. And then Ryan hit on some really good points regarding our tribes and the treaties and water deals. All that comes in play as well. So it's much bigger than just us. And I think we did send you guys a note. I'm logging out right at 11:30 Arizona time. I have to go hit Green Valley, Gabe. So it's about an hour away from where I'm sitting. So I have to go do some work there. But wanted to just thank you guys for having me on, and obviously I leave you in great hands with both the co-chairs of our awesome caucus there. So Gabe, Ryan, I'll see you guys at work pretty soon. Hopefully not too soon next week, but maybe hopefully the week after, guys.
Thanks, Congressman Ciscomani.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Juan. Yeah, we were just talking before we got on about some great bird hunting areas in southern Arizona, including Patagonia and Sierra Vista, but also the mountain ranges that we share, the Peloncillos, the Chiricahuas, Animas Range. Those are all shared sky island habitats that help support things like Coues deer and Montezuma quail, which are amazing. I think, I think these proposals will continue to come. There's a fundamental political ideology. Some of it has started in my district that many folks call the Sagebrush Rebellion, and the origins of the Sagebrush Rebellion and what that means. And I think there is a balance that we can have. There is a balance of both producing natural resources in this country in a balanced way that both helps support rural communities, that is responsible development, but also, when I go to a place like Otero Mesa, which is the largest remaining Chihuahuan desert grasslands in the country, and I'm able to harvest a Barbary sheep at 450 yards and have to work 4.5 hours just to get that sheep down from that mountain, and what that means to me, especially having this job, and for anybody else that gets to do that, that's a special thing, not just for me, but for those dozens of other people that are out there and their families and their kids. And so protecting public lands fundamentally to me is about protecting an American way of life that we do share, not just across the West, as the Secretary mentioned, but in places like Great Smoky Mountains National Park, where you see, where you see bear cubs crossing the road sometimes at places like Cades Cove and places in New Mexico where you get to fish for Gila trout right behind me right here, which is an endemic species, only exists in the Gila River, or you get to go down to the Boot Heel area neighboring to Juan's district and get to hunt if you are very lucky for Gould's turkey or for Montezuma quail. Those are the spaces that are open to us, to all Americans, where if you want to use your quads, the quads God gave you, not the quads that are on four wheels, but you want to use the quads that God gave you, and you want to be able to get out there and work really hard for something. That is the spirit of being an American, of being able to get out into some of these lands, into some of these areas. And so to folks that think that that this would be better left in private hands, I can tell you, look at the amount of Texas license plates that are in Lincoln County, in Ruidoso, New Mexico, because Texas only has 2% of federal land. And guess where they all come to hike and to fish and to hunt and to buy, property in the mountains? They all come to New Mexico. And there's a reason for that, is because it brings a level of equality. It levels the playing field where I don't have to pay for access to get to do these things other than my hunting license. And if I'm lucky enough to draw a tag, which is a different story, we can talk about that some other time. But you get the opportunities. Any American gets the opportunity to do that. That is in the true spirit, I believe, of what the caucus really stands for, is giving Americans that level playing field of being able to access those lands. And I'm sure Senator Lee, perhaps others, will bring proposals forward in the future. And this is one of the reasons this caucus exists, is to make sure that we can blunt those attacks.
Well, thank you so much for that. And I know this is something that Congressman Ciscomani mentioned as well. Now, Congressman Zinke, you led, of course, the Public Lands and Public Hands Act, a bill supported by everybody on this call, including Ciscomani, who had to leave. Now, legislation around public lands can sometimes serve as a marker of values or as a tool to drive concrete change. In your view, where does this bill fit on that spectrum, and how do you measure its success?
Certainly, I think public lands, the discussion of it in the last couple of years it's on, everyone's radar, and it should be. But in the discussion is, our use, what is the highest and best use of our public lands, and what process should we go forward if, in fact, let's say the 30 acres, in outside Lima, Montana, should that be able to go, outside of federal? And how do you do that to make sense of what's in the highest and best use? But I think it in many ways it's a marker, but it's also achievable. Look, I can tell you what the polls say. If you're on the Democrat side, 99% of the Democrats would disagree with selling public land. On independent side, it's about 89, and only 10% of the Republicans want to sell public land. The rest of them even haven't heard about it. But this is not a Republican, Democrat, independent issue. I think this is an American issue. But what's exciting about the caucus is, the sale of public land, I think, united a lot of America in a common purpose. So wait a minute, I never thought about that somehow our park system or BLM land, would be in jeopardy. And then also, I think it was an opportunity to how best manage it. Because I think we can all agree, we should not burn our forest down every season all the time. And you do need to look at sustainable yield and removing dead and dying trees and better management practices. And you got to look at wildlife corridors and flyways and watersheds and all these things in order to make sure we promote a healthy system. And it's the system that we all enjoy. Where are we going to have public access? Does it connect? Do the trails connect? And what's the future of what I think is our greatest gem is public lands. And look, we enjoy what a lot of nations don't. And my good friends from Texas, they don't have a lot of public lands. I'll disagree with Gabe. I think they have 3%, not 2%, but it's not a lot. But having said that, I think we have an obligation to make sure that the experience that what was given to us is to a degree thought about and how to preserve, that legacy for the next generation and generations to come. Better management practices, looking at issues. And look, we may agree or disagree among our caucus members. I think that's healthy. But I think it's looking at areas where we do agree, where we're passionate about it. And look, if Gabe is passionate about an argument, so passionate, and I have a relationship with Gabe, you know what? I'm going to listen to him. And I think that's the brilliance of having a caucus and brilliance of having a caucus of people that want to solve a problem, that are passionate about an issue. And that's what drives change.
Well, thank you so much for that. I think it's a great segue into really thinking about forest management and wildfire to an extent. Congressman Vasquez, you're on the Agriculture Committee and specifically Forestry Horticulture Subcommittee. What efforts are you seeing that have the potential to support proactive fire or wildfire management and forest restoration right now?
Thanks, Max. Well, I'm proud that one of the bills I've passed in Congress is an aerial wildfire fighting bill that allows the Department of Defense to use some of their spare parts from their aircraft and other defense parts to be able to use for domestic wildfires across the West. And we've seen the two largest wildfires in New Mexico's history, ravage different parts of our state, including the Black Fire in the Gila National Forest just a few years ago, and certainly more fires and the consequences of those fires in places like Ruidoso, New Mexico, where we're now seeing, the consequences of massive flooding because of a blown out watershed from the South Fork and the Salt Fires. And those impact real communities. Those have closed down businesses. Those have made people evacuate from their homes. Those are real consequences of not being able to manage our forests correctly or to the best of our ability. Now, to the question about public lands and the federal government's role in wildfire management, this is one of the things I think people have to realize is that if we ever gave those public lands to the states, just the amount that it takes to actually fight the fire itself, let alone the mitigation, is not something that they can overcome with their state budgets. It's in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and it is the responsibility of the federal government to be able to do that. You go back to the days of when the Forest Service first started, and when we were building new rail across the western states like Washington and Idaho, and we were building new mountain communities and new frontier communities. And we knew that the human-caused activity, whether it was mining or building the rail, was inevitably going to lead to some causes of wildfire, right? So we created Smokey Bear and Smokey Bear campaign, which was great to make sure everyone is cautious. But there are both natural causes, human causes of wildfires. The consequences of what that means for taxpayers in this country is massive in terms of what we have to pay for them. But we could be doing things a lot better. And when I go up to communities like Cloudcroft, New Mexico, or Ruidoso, New Mexico, and they say, hey, all we ever wanted to do was just get a permit to thin around some of these power lines that potentially in a catastrophic wind event where we get 50 to 60 mile per hour winds and these power lines go down, if we don't have a 50-yard buffer on each side of this power line, we're all toast. That's common sense. That's common sense stuff to me in terms of how we should be managing the human impact in forest, how we should be dealing with these wild urban interfaces where folks, are now living in mountain towns and mountain communities. And so something's got to change, and we have to have more common sense in the way that we do this. Now, Representative Zinke and I might have different ideas about how to do that. But I think in the end, protecting the economy of rural communities, protecting the ultimate health and habitat of wildlife corridors in these massive national forests that we have in both of our states that help provide us those opportunities for recreation, safeguarding those elements is the best thing. And that's one of the ways I see my job here in Congress is what is the greatest good and how can we do the good for most people? And so we've got to continue to support efforts to be able to both manage our forests in a responsible way. And we do have to protect critical an endangered species or species of environmental or special concern and those kinds of things. We can. But I think sometimes the current rules that exist are very rigid. They don't account for things like a changing climate. They don't account for increased human development. And we've got to be able to change the way that we do that in a smart and intelligent way. And so sometimes these blanket policies on forest management don't always work for different ecosystems, for different habitats. And so I think personally that there's got to be more of a regional influence in terms of how we actually manage our forests. And the forest plan, you know, the system that we developed in 2012, which is the new forest planning rule, allows for a thing called adaptive management, which says if the conditions change on the ground, you're able to change how much money you put into, for example, prescribed burning or into thinning projects, or even creating, you know, local timber harvesting opportunities for folks. That's a good thing. I was part of that planning commission when that forest rule was being created in 2012. And I think it's the right way to go, but we also have to fund our land management agencies adequately to be able to do that in partnership with local communities.
One thing that I really appreciate is that, again, you're not focusing necessarily on the tactics, but what is that end goal and what are the values that we're bringing to this discussion? And, you know, I'm really happy that you brought up funding, as I think that's where we're going to pivot next to Congressman Zinke. You know, you're a member of the Appropriations Committee, and especially on, you know, Interior, Environment, and Related Agencies subcommittee. You have immense knowledge, as, you know, you've been in charge of the other side of that coin in the past. How are you working to ensure that agencies have the resources that they need to manage our public lands, address maintenance backlogs, and support gateway communities that depend on outdoor recreation?
Well, yeah, I was the architect of the Great American Outdoors Act, which up front was the largest investment in the history of this country to repair our lagging infrastructure on public lands, forests, and in our parks. Well, one is we're going to have to reauthorize that bill to make sure that that continues coming up. But you look at, where we are in our parks, infrastructure, forests, funding. Let's take the National Park Service, which we all love. And I'm an advocate. Look, the front line has to be healthy. So how many people are in the parks? This last year, more people, employees, were in Yellowstone on the front line than ever before. So there was this drama somehow the parks didn't have the people. But where the people are in the National Park Service is over half of the employees in our wonderful National Park Service don't work in parks. They work in a headquarters somewhere. So I think on funding, you have to look at where the funding is, and should we put more assets in the front line? Because if the parks that I spent a lot of time in Yellowstone, a lot of the bridges need to be redone, even though the Great American Outdoors Act put a lot of money in there. The scale of what's necessary to catch up, as you point out, is considerable. And this is the same thing in our national forests. And look, I think our forests are undervalued assets in that I think we can do better on recreation in our forests, better trail systems on our forests, better sewer systems on some of the areas that get a lot of attention. But there's a lot of infrastructure, I think, to improve public access and habitat that is necessary. And lastly, just on forests and funding. When we're spending billions and billions and billions of dollars each year fighting fires, we're putting at risk a lot of our firefighters that are in there in forests and Gabe and I agree that we need to manage our forests. And if a forest has 250 million board feet of sustainable growth, that means you can take out 450 million board feet forever. When these forests are choked down to 5 million board feet, a catastrophe is going to happen in those forests. They just need to be managed. and perhaps the management should go out and do a landscape on these huge landscapes and make sure we're managing it at a much broader level. And that's a discussion that we should have on both sides. How do we manage our forests so you don't burn them down, so we don't destroy our watershed, so we don't destroy our habitat, and we end up limiting public access and quite limiting use and enjoyment of our public lands. I think we can do a lot better.
Well, thank you for that. And I want to pivot to, folks on this call. I think they've joined because they want to be engaged. And I want to open this up to both of you around, what opportunities do you see for everyday people, especially local communities most connected to these landscapes, to engage with the caucus and help shape priorities in a way that also balances long-term national interests for public land? How can folks on this call get engaged with the caucus and land management?
Well, thank you, Max. I'll take a first stab at this. Well, look, one of the reasons this caucus is so important is because you have 10 Democrats and you have 10 Republicans that you can talk to in an honest way about some of the priorities that you have both regionally or in your state or across the country for our federal land management system and public lands. And that's a great thing because as a public land advocate and a conservation advocate before I came to this job, I was always searching for who I could talk to, who's going to listen, who's going to take me seriously. And so I think the caucus is a place to bring people together that take this issue seriously and that you can have those conversations with. And so I'd encourage folks to contact any member of the caucus, and that's a great starting point. The caucus will publish a website here shortly. We'll have all of our offices listed in that contact information, as well as some of our mission statements and things that we're working on to move this caucus forward. And that's also a great opportunity for folks to be able to reach out to us, tell people about what we do, who we are. And I think that, as Juan mentioned earlier, this is one of the great uniting opportunities for us to work together across party lines right now. And it's really important to me. The mountain ranges and the rivers and the forests and the deserts and the grasslands that I represent, that's where I look at when I travel across my district. And those are the natural resources that I want to protect every day. And there's other folks in Congress, there's other folks that are part of this caucus, and hopefully we'll be able to bring in some more that share that same value. And so that you're talking with folks who are willing to listen, whether it's themselves or their staff. That's one of the values of being able to bring this caucus together. So we'll get that website up here pretty soon. But in the meantime, I know there's a list of all 20 of our members, and we're going to continue to grow that as much as we can for the benefit of the public land users. And as we move forward in these different legislative priorities that we can develop as a caucus, including our Public Lands and Public Hands Act, and how we can move that forward. It's the same on the other side. We're going to need your help. We're going to need to ask for your support, whether it's in Montana or Wyoming or Utah, Arizona or New Mexico or Virginia or Tennessee. We're going to be asking for the same thing, is we need your support to get some of this stuff across the finish line. And that oftentimes involves, being able to talk to your congressperson in your committee or a committee of jurisdiction. So it'll be a two-way communication, two-way street there.
I would say for everyone, stay vigilant. As was pointed out earlier, the threat of sale of public lands, I think remains, a threat. Stay vigilant. And then, I'll look at areas where we can work together. And certainly, what I did mention is I enjoy the personal debate between myself and Gabe on whether Montana or New Mexico, who has the bigger elk.
Well, you know what? We wiped out our elk in the 1950s because we overhunted them. And so we actually had to transport them from Wyoming and Montana. So they're technically the same elk, right?
But I've hunted in New Mexico and I've seen some big bulls. Yeah. So we'll have to over hunt together. We'll have to see. But yeah, but no, it's shared values, and And lastly, we live in kind of a hyper-partisan environment. And how do you kind of break through is you find areas where can you work together, you're passionate about it. And a lot of it's relationships. How do you tackle the tough ones? Well, you tackle kind of the easy ones first, and then you get a relationship with trust, and then that kind of compounds, and then you can get things done not only in areas of natural resources and public lands, but you can get a lot of things done for the benefit of Americans on a lot of issues. So. I'm excited. It's a good group, and I'm excited about Gabe's leadership, and glad that Juan was on the phone call today. But again, stay vigilant, stay active. We'll get the website, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as we close up in the last few seconds here, I'd really, like to think about looking ahead. What would both of you like to see? What's one thing you'd like to see the Public Lands Caucus accomplish by the end of this Congress?
Well, look, I'll say in my very personal and most perhaps opportunistic ways, I want to keep doing the same thing I like to do on public lands. And I want the next generation of people from New Mexico to do the same thing that I do on public lands. I want them to be able to see out into those mountain ranges, wonder what's on the other side of that mountain, of that hill, what's in that arroyo, how the watershed works, and be able to walk in there and be able to experience the wildlife, the native plants, the opportunities to hunt and to fish, the opportunities to camp, to bike, to mountain climb. That's ultimately why I'm so passionate about this, because those things enrich your life in a way that is uniquely American, in a way that I think we all should deserve to have. And you go out there and you sit in the grass for a little while, and maybe you're glassing an elk or you're glassing a deer, or you're eating a sandwich, and you realize that life's a little bit bigger than you are. And I think that's a reflection every American needs to have, especially in these trying political times that we often don't get to have, especially in Washington, D.C., because we're all cooped up in these little tiny apartments filled with concrete and ambulances and police cars and stuff. And there's nothing like what we have here. And I want to make sure that we preserve that. And so the most immediate thing is that we prevent any future attacks to the wholesale sale of public lands. I think this is the group to do that. And I know with my friend, Representative Zinke, and his experience and talking with his colleagues that we'll be able to do that.
I would say, clearly to project our voice that America loves our public lands. There are ways we can improve our management of public lands. There's a way we can highest and best use, best science, longest term, greatest purpose. There's a lot of ways we can improve management. But look, America has spoken. America loves our public lands.
Well, thank you both so much. And as we close, I want to thank both of you, as well as Congressman Ciscomani, for your time and your teams and support for making this possible, and everybody on this call for showing up. I also want to give a special thank you to our HCLC members, again, and our partners for this event. As Congressman Vasquez mentioned, New Mexico Wildlife Federation, Arizona Wildlife Federation, Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, and Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. If folks on the call liked what they experienced today and want to continue help us with this work, check out our website at hechoonline.org. Thank you all so much for your time today. Any closing comments from either of you?
Just a big thank you to all you guys, TRCP, BHA. You guys played such a huge role in making this happen, and you organized so many folks that traditionally wouldn't get involved in stuff like this. And that includes NWF and Echo and others as well. So thank you all.
Thank you. Congressman Zinke.
No, Echo. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Good luck in Butte and good luck in Las Cruces. Great rest of your day, everybody.